So, do witches exist? Well, yes, they do. Wicca is a recognised religion. Even the gravestones in Arlington Military Cemetery, some of them contain the pentagram, which is the Wiccan symbol. But that's not what we're looking at here today. We're going to have a look at the witch in popular culture and how she has changed from this to this, or from this to this. So we'll have a look and see how popular culture has reflected the change in attitude to witch in society, and see how she has changed on our screens. With the release of the first instalment of the excellent musical Wicked onto the big screen, how does it compare with its great-grandmother, The Wizard of Oz? And how has our attitude to the depiction of the witch figure changed since the beginning? We look at the major witch-featuring movies and TV shows to examine the evolution of the witch in popular culture. We could of course go back to Shakespeare's Macbeth and all the old fairy tales, but I imagine an 8-hour video will not fare well. So we will take up the story with what they originally called moving pictures. During the first 2 decades, only 9 American films contained a witch. Of these 9, 5 were dramatizations of beloved fantasy stories. The list includes The Magic Sword in 1901, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1910, His Majesty the Scarecrow in 1914, and Mary Pickford in Cinderella in 1914 and Snow White in 1916. In all of these films, the witch is a non-threatening fairy tale construct. Her appearance and behaviour recall the circus clown court jester with a big round collar and colourful patchwork clothing, or a heavy wizard cape and a cone hat. She plays the role of the buffoon. Because this is the silent film era, filmmakers primarily use visual cues to define the character. To do so, they had to draw on pre-cinematic cultural sources in order to speak to their viewers. The witch as a clown can be found in illustrations from the same time period. Additionally, all of these stooped elderly witches are surrounded by other cliches such as brooms, cauldrons and pointed hats. The first serious film to include witchcraft is the film The Mysterious Myra in 1915. It's the most interesting of these early witch movies. This is a popular 17-part serial, and it recounts the tale of Myra Maynard, the daughter of an occult leader, who was repeatedly hunted by her dead father's devil-worshipping order. In each episode, the narrative tackles an occult subject with no mention of witchcraft until episode 13. In this aptly numbered episode, a cloaked witch helps Myra escape the satanic order. It's interesting that despite the narrative proximity of witchcraft and Satanism in the serial, the writers clearly separate the two magical practices. In this way, the witch remains a fantasy construction. At some point in the pre-cinematic entertainment world, the witch was separated from her satanic connections and became trapped within the fairy tale. During the period ranging from 1916 to 1932, there's only one witch film, a lost animated short called At Rainbow's End from 1925. Why did the witch disappear? At this time, movies had transitioned from novelty to commodity. The fantasy witch had no place in the salacious adult entertainment and therefore disappeared. However, by 1932, the world of Hollywood had drastically changed. Silent films turned to sound, talkies, and the Hays Commission began enforcing its Catholic-based moral censorship code. Additionally, the country had lived through a world war, the freewheeling roaring 20s, and was now in a deep economic depression. Hollywood responded with wholesome, upbeat and glittery escapist films. Not surprisingly, the fantasy witch reappears. From 1932 to 1939, Hollywood produced 5 witch films, including Disney's Babes in the Woods, Betty Boop's Snow White, Betty Boop's Baby Be Good, and The Greedy Humpty Dumpty. At first glance, these animated witches appear to be similar to the earlier variety. They are hags in rags with cauldrons, brooms and pointy hats. However, there is a difference. In Disney's Babes in the Woods in 1932, the witch plays the buffoon, but she is more grotesque form. Her pointy face and emaciated body are gangly and sharply angled. Her clothes, now dark and ragged, are topped with flowing torn cape. This iconic look is repeated over and over throughout the period. Then in 1937, Disney released what would become his masterpiece, the first full-length animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In its wake, the film created the famous American Hollywood witch, the Wicked Queen. She is the first witch to step out of the sideshow act and enter the realm of macabre. Disney's Queen is a mixture of the early fairy tale witch, the 1930s animated hag, and something new, something darker. While she is still trapped within the fairy tale narrative, she is frightening and intense in both her forms, a hag in rags and a glamorous queen. The Wicked Queen is a femme fatale who uses her feminine beauty to ensnare. During the pre-1939 period, the witch began her journey as a sideshow act, devoid of any esoteric or theological meaning. By the end, she transformed into an allegory for a powerful, independent, sexualized woman. Was this a function of America's need to reinforce traditional gender roles during the Depression, or was it simply a function of Disney's own conservative nature? For the rest of this look at the witch, on our screens, big and small, we will leave Disney and animated versions there. But we will meet some Disney witch constructs later in a new form. The first movie witch most people remember is the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, played so well by Margaret Hamilton. She was just pantomime evil with no redeeming features whatsoever, and this character's evolution alone is an example of how the depiction of the witch has changed over the years. We next meet her played by Mila Kunis in the 2013 film The Great and Powerful Oz. It must be said at this point that the 3 movie incarnations are standalone depictions of the character and have no continuity. They even have different names and different origin stories. But that in itself assists us in examining the changing attitude to the witch, as we will see in a minute. In this movie, the witch is an attractive, gentle and kind woman who is the first to encounter the wizard on his arrival in Oz. Oh yes, we must point out the 3 movies have no chronological relationship to each other either. Spurned later in the movie by the eponymous wizard, she literally turns green with jealousy. And as they say, hell had no fury like a woman scorned. For spoiler reasons, I won't give away much about the latest movie, although I suspect most of you watching this will already know the story. Suffice to say, in this incarnation, played marvellously by Cynthia Erivo, she was born different, i.e. green, and had to suffer prejudice and rejection. But it wasn't this that turned her into the subject of fear, but a desire to fight injustice and being vilified by patriarchal propaganda. A bit closer to real life, methinks. So, not only were the names different, in The Wizard of Oz she had no name, but the origin story differs vastly from a simply wicked woman to a jealous woman to a fierce advocate for justice. Interestingly, the Glinda character, the so-called Good Witch, has had something of an opposite arc, going from being sickeningly, at least to modern audiences, good, to somewhat duplicitous, to downright vapid. A final note on this is that although both female characters change completely, the male one, the so-called wizard, stayed consistent. He remained his weak, duplicitous, manipulating, bordering on Machiavellian self. The only thing that changed is the audience attitude to such a character. In the first he is seen as an avuncular character, a jolly trickster, a lovable rogue, but by the last he's a political deviant, spreading misinformation and false news and scapegoating a section of the population to maintain his tenuous grip on power. A bit more true to life. Our next witch is Veronica Lake, as Jennifer in I Married a Witch, and probably the first real depiction of the witch as a femme fatale, who ends up hoisted on her own petard. A trope you will find repeated on this list. Just as she's about to be burned at the stake for witchcraft in the 17th century, Jennifer, Veronica Lake, casts a curse on the family of her accuser, dooming all men of future generations to marry the wrong woman. Freed from her eternal prison some 250 years later, Jennifer decides to make the most recent descendant of her accuser, Frederick Marsh, even more miserable by using a love potion on him that makes him fall in love with her. A plan which backfires in unexpected ways. Our next witch follows much the same storyline of the temptress witch. In the late 1950s, Gillian Holroyd, played by Kim Novak, is a modern-day witch living in New York City's Greenwich Village. When she encounters charming publisher Stephen Henderson, played by James Stewart, she decides to make him hers by casting a love spell. Gillian takes added pleasure in doing so because Henderson is engaged to her old college rival, Janice Rule. However, Gillian finds herself actually falling for Shepard, which poses a problem. She will lose her powers if she falls in love. This is another movie which influenced probably the most famous witchy TV series of the 60s, Bewitched, including the characters of the male witch and a rather ditzy aunt. On the subject of male witches, let's address the subject of gender here. Now, we're not opening the argument of pronouns, etc. I'm not storing that particular cauldron. But just to say that in witchcraft circles, a male witch is a witch. This predates the common use of gender-neutral terms and has more to do with the negative connotations of the word warlock, meaning deceiver. This movie also introduces the familiar in the guise of a cat, Pyewacket. Moving into the 60s, and our witch moves to the small screen, in the guise of the sexy wife and mother, albeit in two very different guises. Both hitting screens 60 years ago this year. The first is Morticia Addams. In the Addams family, Morticia is the wife of Gomez Addams and the mother of Wednesday, Pugsley, and Pubert Addams. The character originated in Charles Addams' cartoon for the New Yorker magazine in the 1930s. In the cartoons, none of the family members had names. When the characters were adapted to the 1964 television series, Charles Addams' selection of her name was inspired by Mortician. Morticia's maiden name is Frump, and she has an older sister named Ophelia, also played by Carolyn Jones in the original TV series. In the television series, her mother is Hester Frump, played by Margaret Hamilton, who you will remember from The Wizard of Oz, and her mother-in-law is Grandmama Addams. In the 1990s Addams Family films, familial relationships had changed for the characters of Grandmama and Fester. Grandmama is actually Morticia's mother, not Gomez's, while Fester is Gomez's brother, not Morticia's uncle. Morticia is slim with extremely pale skin and long flowing straight black hair. She commonly wears black hobble dresses to match her hair, tightly form-fitting with a fringe of octopus-like cloth tentacles at the lower hem. According to Wednesday, Morticia applies baking powder to her face instead of actual makeup. In each episode, she easily allures her husband Gomez by speaking French, or any other foreign language for that matter. Morticia is musically inclined and is often seen freely strumming a Japanese shamisen. She frequently enjoys cutting the buds off of roses which she discards, keeping only the stems. She likes cutting out paper dolls with 3 heads and making sweaters with 3 arms, collecting the mail from the hand in the box thing, and cooking unusual concoctions for her husband, including Eye of Newt. Her personal pet is Cleopatra, a fictitious breed of carnivorous plant called an African strangler, to which she feeds hamburgers and various other meats. She's described as a witch. In one episode she wears a black pointed hat. Her family tree can be traced back to Salem, Massachusetts, and witchcraft is also applied at times in the television series. For example, Morticia likes to smoke, an activity that she does not involving cigarettes or cigars, such as her husband frequently enjoys, but smoke instead emanates directly from her. In contrast, in Bewitched, which was also heavily influenced by the previous 2 movies, a beautiful witch named Samantha Elizabeth Montgomery meets and marries a mortal named Darren Stevens, Dick York and later Dick Sargent. While Samantha complies with Darren's wishes to become a normal suburban housewife, her magical family disapproves of the mixed marriage and frequently interferes with the couple's lives. Episodes often begin with Darren becoming the victim of a spell, the effects of which wreak havoc with mortals such as his boss, clients, parents and neighbours. By the epilogue, however, Darren and Samantha most often embrace, having overcome the devious elements that fail to separate them. The witches and their male counterparts, in this case they are called warlocks, are very long-lived, while Samantha appears to be a young woman. Many episodes suggest she is actually hundreds of years old. To keep their society secret, witches avoid showing their powers in front of mortals, other than Darren. Nevertheless, the effects of their spells and Samantha's attempts to hide their supernatural origin from mortals drive the plot of most episodes. Witches and warlocks usually use physical gestures along with their incantations to perform magic. Samantha often twitches her nose to create a spell. Special visual effects are accompanied by music to highlight such an action. The other main depiction of a witch in the 60s is the 1966 movie starring Joan Fontaine, The Witches. This follows a school teacher escaping African witchcraft and returning to rural England to teach, only to find witchcraft and indeed human sacrifice is alive and well in Middle England. The start of the 70s saw the witch return to the musical, courtesy of Disney, with the movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks. During the Battle of Britain, Miss Eglantine Price, Angela Lansbury, a cunning witch in training, decides to use her supernatural powers to defeat the Nazi menace. She sets out to accomplish this task with the aid of 3 inventive children who have been evacuated from the London Blitz. Joined by Emilius Brown, David Tomlinson, the head of Miss Price's witchcraft training correspondence school, the crew uses an enchanted bed to travel into Fantasyland and foil encroaching German troops. It might interest viewers to know that such a ritual did actually occur in real life. British witches had purportedly used a ritual, the Cone of Power, in 1588 to help fight off the Spanish Armada, and in 1805 to end Napoleon's threat to England. They were going to use it once more in 1940. The Cone of Power would be directed toward Hitler's brain, to cloud his judgment, weaken his resolve and hasten his downfall. It was August the 1st, 1940, and Lammas Eve, or Lunasa as we call it in Ireland, an important harvest festival for the Wiccan religion. When Gerald Gardner and his coven met in the New Forest, just north of Highcliffe, they met around an ancient hangman's tree called the Naked Man. From there the coven walked to Fernie Knap Enclosure, a wooded area where the ritual would take place. Instead of the traditional bonfire, the witches used a shuttered lantern. Gardner was still an air raid warden after all, and danced in a spiral around it while naked, or sky-clad in Wiccan vernacular, to generate the magical energy needed from the cone. As the coven chanted and danced, Gardner invoked the words of the spell, and the assault on Hitler's brain began. Did it work? Well, I'll leave you to judge, but soon after Hitler made 3 huge blunders that changed the course of the war. He switched his attacks from RAF airfield to London, giving the RAF the respite they needed to regroup and defeat the Luftwaffe. He launched Operation Barbarossa, attacking the Soviet Union, which was a major mistake, and declared war on the US, bringing them into the European theatre. Although some would say he never had much military nous in the first place. Another musical followed, The Wiz, and despite having such heavyweights as Michael Jackson, Diana Ross and Lena Horne, it's best skipped over. I know when we watch fantasy we suspend disbelief, but flying beds and football playing lions I can get on board with. But a 34-year-old Dorothy is a bit of a stretch. There must have been some up-and-coming Motown stars who were more age-appropriate to the part. I would argue also that 2 other big horror movies that are kind of the witch genre aren't as such, and that is The Blood on Satan's Claw and The Wicker Man. They're focused more on paganism rather than witchcraft, so we will leave them there. On TV, Tabitha followed. It was a spin-off from Bewitched that aired on ABC from September 77 to January 78. The series starred Lisa Hatman in the title role of Tabitha Stevens, the witch daughter of Samantha and Darren Stevens, who was introduced on Bewitched during its 2nd season. Unlike Bewitched, which was a hit for ABC and aired for 8 seasons, Tabitha failed to catch on with viewers and was cancelled after 11 episodes. As we leave the 70s, the witch really took hold in popular culture. So let's have a look at the many iconic witches who have graced our screens in the last 40 years. We begin with Alexandra, Jane and Suki, the witches of Eastwick. As we enter the 80s, the theme gets darker and more adult. A supernatural comedy film based on John Updike novel of the same name. Alexandra Medford, Jane Spoford and Suki Ridgemont are 3 single career women who don't realise they are witches and have accidentally formed a coven with their weekly meetings. A mysterious man comes into their lives and impregnates them, even Jane, who believes she couldn't have children. Becoming wary of the stranger, the 3 women fight back with Voodoo Doll and soon face off against him. While clearly some demonic entity, it's never made clear just what the stranger, Daryl Van Horn, is, being anything from Satan to a lesser demon, or even being conjured by the witches. The film is notably lighter than the book, which at one point features the witches causing another girl Daryl takes interest in, and even marries, to die of cancer. Louise Miller. At the other end of the 80s, we arrive at the high school genre with Teen Witch. High school nerd Louise Miller, Robin Lively, learns from psychic Madame Serena, Zelda Rubinstein, that she's possessed with magical abilities that will begin working on her 16th birthday. When the prophecy proves true, the teenager uses her new powers to get what she's always desired, popularity. After getting back at some bullies, the young witch casts a spell over hunky jock Brad Powell, Dan Gautier. But Louise soon learns that getting what you want isn't all it's cracked up to be. On TV in the 80s, we meet 2 witches who will be reimagined for a new generation in recent years, both really aimed at younger viewers. Mildred Hubble. We have the first TV outing of the worst witch, Mildred Hubble. She is one of the young girls at the prestigious Witch Academy. She can't seem to do anything right and is picked on by classmates and teachers. The headmistress of the school, Miss Cackle, Charlotte Ray, has an evil twin sister, Agatha, who plans to destroy the school. Can Mildred foil the plan before the Grand Wizard, Tim Curry, comes to the Academy for the Halloween celebration? You'll never forget. The White Witch. The White Witch in the person of Barbara Kellerman in BBC's miniseries The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Obviously lacking the special effects of its later big-budget offspring, this is still a quaint retelling of the C.S. Lewis classic. The 1990s sees the renaissance of the witch in popular culture, both in movies and on TV. The phenomenon of the teenage witch bursts onto our screens. In this decade, the witch is sassy, sexy, young, old, naughty and nice. This is the decade of the witch. And the queens of them all have to be the Sanderson sisters in Hocus Pocus. After moving to Salem, Massachusetts, teenager Max Dennison, Omri Katz, explores the abandoned house with his sister Danny, Thora Birch, and their new friend Alison, Vanessa Shaw. After dismissing a story Alison tells as superstitious, Max accidentally frees a coven of evil witches, Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker and Kathy Najimy, who used to live in the house. Now, with the help of a magical cat, the kids must steal the witch's book of spells to stop them from becoming immortal at the expense of the children of the neighbourhood. Sarah in The Craft, another high school witch. After transferring to Los Angeles High School, Sarah Robin Tooney finds that her telekinetic gift appeals to a group of 3 wannabe witches, who happen to be seeking a 4th member for their rituals. Bonnie, Neve Campbell, Rochelle, Rachel True, and Nancy, Firuza Balk. Like Sarah herself, all have troubled backgrounds, which combined with their nascent powers leads to dangerous consequences. When a minor spell causes a fellow student to lose her hair, the girls grow power mad. One of my favourite movies of the witch genre contains 2 witches, Sally and Gillian Owens, and that's practical magic. Sally, Sandra Bullock, and Gillian Owens, Nicole Kidman, born into a magic family, have mostly avoided witchcraft themselves. But when Gillian's vicious boyfriend, Jimmy Angelov, dies unexpectedly, the Owens sisters give themselves a crash course in hard magic. With policeman Gary Hallett, Aidan Quinn, grown suspicious, the girls struggle to resurrect and unwittingly inject his course with the evil spirit that threatens to end the family line. One of the most bizarre and grotesque witches of children's literature could only come from the pen of Roald Dahl, and that's the Grand High Witch in Witches. While staying at a hotel in England with his grandmother, Helga, my Zetterling, young Luke, Jason Fisher, inadvertently spies on a convention of witches. The Grand High Witch, Angelica Houston, reveals a plan to turn all children into mice through a magical formula. When they find that Luke is overheard, the witches test the formula on him. Now, with the help of Helga and the hotel manager, Mr. Stringer, Ron Atkinson, Luke the Mouse must fight back against the witches. Marnie in Halloween Town. Marnie gets a big shock when they follow Grandma home to Halloween Town and find out they come from a family of witches. The town is the only place where supernatural beings can lead a normal life. But trouble is looming, and on her 13th birthday, Marnie not only finds she's a witch, but that her family are involved in a fight against evil that threatens to take over the world. Eve Baptiste in Eve's Bio. Over the course of a long hot Louisiana summer, a 10-year-old girl, Eve Baptiste, discovers that her family's affluent existence is merely a facade. The philandering of her suave doctor father, Lewis Samuel L. Jackson, creates a rift, throwing Eve's mother, Roz, Lynn Whitfield, and teenage sister Cicely, Megan Good, into emotional turmoil. Eve, though, manages to find some solace with her quirky psychic aunt, Moselle. Abigail Williams, The Crucible. Based on the play by Arthur Miller, after married man John Proctor, Daniel Day-Lewis, decides to break off his affair with a young lover, Abigail Williams, Winona Ryder. She leads the other girls in an occult rite to wish death upon his wife, Elizabeth Joan Allen. When the ritual is discovered, the girls are brought to trial. Accusations begin to fly and a literal witch hunt gets underway. Before long, Elizabeth is suspected of witchcraft, and John's attempt to defend her only makes matters worse. On TV too, we are treated to some of the most iconic witches of modern popular culture, starting with Sabrina Spellman. Few fictional witches in the 1990s managed to penetrate the cultural zeitgeist quite as thoroughly as Sabrina Spellman. Sabrina, Melissa Joan Hart, was a well-intentioned but clumsy 16-year-old when she found out she was a witch. Her aunts Hilda, Caroline Ray, and Zelda, Beth Broderick, serve as her guides and caregivers, while Salem, Nick Barkey, their pet, was transformed into a cat after trying to achieve world domination. The series was a light-hearted romp that dealt with Sabrina learning magic, but her spells usually bite her and others in the butt, making her less powerful than other witches from the 90s. In 2018, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina was released by Netflix, and it's gone on to become one of the streaming service's most popular series, and we'll look at that in more detail later. Again, one of the most iconic series of the 90s. We meet the Halliwell sisters in Charmed. Phoebe, Prue and Piper were sisters who found out they were witches after discovering their family's Book of Shadows. Phoebe was the youngest and had the power of premonition. Prue was the oldest and telekinetic, and Piper the middle sister who could freeze objects and people in time. The series format had the sisters facing a villain of the week, but the main antagonist was the source of all evil. As the series progressed, their abilities evolved and their relationship grew. This was more than just another Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and ended up as one of the most popular shows about witches in the 90s, with a great cast of spell-slinging characters, even beyond the core trio. And speaking of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I think we get to possibly, for people of that era, that generation, one of the most popular witches of the 90s, Willow Rosenberg. Willow had one of the most tremendous character growths in Buffy. When she met Buffy, Willow was a timid and unpopular computer whiz. As the series progressed, she became more assured of herself and started practicing magic. While studying magic inadvertently led her down a dangerous road, she found herself again with the help of friends. Many viewers related to Willow as she was initially the underdog of the series. Thanks to smart storytelling and a great performance, a very powerful yet sympathetic witch, she remains one of the most powerful characters on TV, or in the movies in the 1980s. Sorry to interrupt, but I just thought if you're interested in stories of witchcraft and magic, etc., you might be interested in my book, The Chosen. The Chosen is set in Ireland in the year 1798, a year when the Irish were in open rebellion against the British Crown. A young witch helps a wounded rebel, and this act of kindness leads her into a world of magic and war. A battle not just for Ireland, but a battle for the entire of humanity. If that's your type of thing, you can get my book from Amazon. It's available on Amazon itself, it's available on Kindle, and it's available on Kindle Prime. In 21st century, The Witch has gone from strength to strength, both in productions where the witch is the central character and a side character. One, of course, which nobody will not know about, whether you're a fan or you're not a fan, would be Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley, etc. in the Harry Potter series. The witch was brought to a whole new generation by the Harry Potter franchise. Wands, cauldrons, brooms, familiars, good and bad witches, hexes, all the tropes of witchcraft are there. The boy who lived will be forever in the minds of 11-year-olds and older fans, still waiting for the Hogwarts letter to arrive. One of the most successful franchises of all time, Harry Potter has every ingredient to make generations fall in love with the outcast boy who fought his way through a magical journey. The audience discovers the real meaning of the magic along the way, and any fans will find themselves teary-eyed when they remember the last time they saw the Golden Trio at platform 9 3/4. Harry is a lonely 11-year-old boy that lives with his uncle, aunt and cousin. After his 11th birthday, weird incidents start to happen around him. Glass walls vanishing and snakes appear to understand what he says. Harry has no idea the grand adventure that's coming to find him in this fantasy epic about witches and wizards of Hogwarts. Witches of an entirely different nature appear in an adventure-packed narrative based on the book by Neil Gaiman, one of the most adopted authors. Stardust has a different take on witches. They are creatures that can stay young if they hunt and kill fallen stars, which become beautiful humans once they reach this planet. With an entertaining cast and compelling visual elements, this film is fun as it is adventurous. Following Tristan, Daredevil's Charlie Cox, on a quest in fairyland to save a fallen star, having no idea the challenges that lay ahead on their journey. From pirate ships that can fly to magical fairylands, this fantasy hits all the marks for an amusing story. Oh, and a great theme song doesn't hurt. Returning once again to historical witches, we meet Mary Sibley in Salem. Salem is one for those who like more classical approach to witches in the media, with compelling characters taking part in one of the most well-known persecutions in history, the Salem witch trials. This artfully crafted TV series has to be mentioned in any list about witches in film and television. The exterior set of the town's main square was built to be as close as they could resemble to the actual square in Salem back in the 17th century. And other creative choices enhanced the feeling of being transported to another century. Amid the witch hunt frenzy, a powerful witch, Mary Sibley, Janet Montgomery, commands Salem with one goal: to distract the Puritans, to be able to summon the devil. Vanessa Ives in Penny Dreadful. Many people are familiar with classic literature characters like Dr. Frankenstein and Dorian Gray. Penny Dreadful brings those and other characters into a new light by exploring their origin stories in this psychological thriller that takes place in the dark corners of Victorian London. So Malcolm is an explorer who has lost his daughter to the city's creatures, and he will do whatever is needed to get her back and to right the past wrongs. His accomplice, seductive clairvoyant Vanessa Ive, recruits charming American Ethan Chandler to help her locate Sir Malcolm's daughter and slay some monsters. Diana Bishop, A Discovery of Witches. A Discovery of Witches is a fantasy series based on the similarly named novel of the All Souls trilogy, written by Deborah Harkins. Reluctant witch historian Diana Bishop discovers a bewitched manuscript in the Bodleian Library. As she attempts to unveil the secret the book holds about magical creatures, she is forced back into a world of magic, full of vampires, demons, witches, and forbidden love. Forming an unlikely alliance, geneticist and vampire Matthew Claremont helps Diana to attempt to protect the book and to solve the riddles within, while at the same time dodging threats from the magical creature world. Alicia in The Order. Alicia is more a ritual magician than a witch, but we will include her in the list nonetheless. When Belgrave University student Jack Morton joins a fabled secret society, the Hermetic Order of the Black Rose, he is thrust into a world of magic, monsters and intrigue. Out to avenge his mother's death, he uncovers dark family secrets and lands in an underground battle being waged between werewolves and practitioners of dark magic. Assisting Jack in the fight is Alicia, a tour guide at Belgrave, and fellow member of the Order, which is led by Jack's estranged father. One of the most famous witches of British or Celtic mythology is Morgana in the Arthurian legends. This action-packed fantasy drama revisits the saga of King Arthur and his wizard Merlin by focusing on the two characters when they were ambitious young men struggling to understand their destinies. In this telling, Prince Arthur is known to be the heir to the throne, no sword from the stone here, and he is acquainted with all those who will one day form the legend of Camelot, including Lancelot, Guinevere and Morgana. Merlin is also forced to deal with King Uther's Great Purge, which bans the use of all magic. Queen Serafina Pekkala in his Dark Materials. Serafina Pekkala was the queen of the Lake Inara clan of witches. During her search for kidnapped friend, a seemingly ordinary but brave young woman from another world uncovers a sinister plot involving stolen children and a mysterious phenomenon called dust. Moraine in the Wheel of Time. Moraine is a member of a magical organisation. Takes 5 young people on a journey, believing that one of them might be the reincarnation of the dragon, a powerful individual prophesied to save the world or destroy it. Esther Michelson, Freya Michelson and Davina Clare in the originals. Klaus, the original vampire-werewolf hybrid, returns to New Orleans, which his family helped build, to investigate rumours of a plot against him. In this spin-off of the Vampire Diaries, he finds his former protégé Marcel reigning powerful over its inhabitants, causing growing tension with the supernatural community. Klaus' brother Elijah joins him and they learn that werewolf Haley has fallen into the hands of a defiant witch who has life-changing information. In the hope of reclaiming the city, Klaus and Elijah form an easy alliance with the witches to help further their cause. Regina and Zelena, yet another name for the Wicked Witch of the West, in Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time tells the story of a new world, one in which fairy tale legends and modern life collide. Emma Swan, Jennifer Morrison, is comfortable in her life as a bail bonds collector when Henry, the child she gave up a decade earlier, suddenly shows up. He is convinced that she is the daughter of Snow White and Prince Charming, who sent her away before the evil queen could cast a spell, freezing the fairy tale world in time and bringing them to present-day Storybrooke, Maine. After taking Henry home, Emma decides to stay in the town and keep an eye on him, and she discovers he may not be wrong after all. Magnus Bane in Shadowhunters. On her birthday, Clary Frey discovers a surprise concerning her life. The teenager is not who she thinks she is. She comes from a long line of human-angel hybrids called Shadowhunters, who hunt demons. After her mother is kidnapped, Clary is thrust into the world of demon hunting. Clary relies on mysterious Jace and fellow hunters Isabel and Alec to help her navigate the dark world. While living in this new world, among creatures like vampires and werewolves and witches, Clary's best friend Simon helps her uncover answers that could help her find her mother. The fantasy show is based on a series of young adult books by Cassandra Clare. Wednesday Addams in Wednesday. While attending Nevermore Academy, Wednesday Addams attempts to master her emerging psychic ability, thwart a killing spree and solve the mystery that embroiled her parents 25 years ago. Lafayette Reynolds in True Blood. Small town Louisiana waitress Suki Stackhouse already is viewed as an oddball by her friends and neighbours, since she can read the minds of those around her. She doesn't exactly help her reputation though when she falls for Bill Compton, a 173-year-old vampire who has come out of the coffin along with many of his undead comrades, now that a new synthetic blood has made it possible for vampires to survive without preying on humans. Still, the conservative locals aren't wild about mortal vampire liaisons, especially Suki's boss Sam Merlot, who carries a torch for her. 6 Feet Under creator Alan Ball is behind the series adaptation of the best-selling novels by Charlene Harris. Lafayette plays the chef in the bar where Suki works and discovers that he is a bruca, a witch. We're back now to Sabrina Spellman and the Weird Sisters. This adaptation of Sabrina the Teenage Witch tale is dark coming-of-age story that traffics in horror and the occult. In the reimagining of the original story, Sabrina Spellman wrestles to reconcile her dual nature, half witch, half mortal, while standing against the evil forces that threaten her family, including aunts Hilda and Zelda, and the daylight world humans inhabit. Kiernan Shipka, Mad Men, leads the cast in a titular role of the show that is based on a comic series of the same name. Agatha Harkness is an ancient witch who lived through the Salem witch trials. She was mentor to the Scarlet Witch and the babysitter of Franklin Richards, and eventually she joined the Daughters of Liberty and the Witches of New Salem. Harkness is also the mother of the evil wizard Nicholas Scratch, who appears in a different guise in the aforementioned Sabrina, and the creator of Darkhold Boy. In Agatha All Along, a spellbound Agatha Harkness regains freedom thanks to a teen's help. Intrigued by his plea, she embarks on the Witch's Road trial to reclaim her powers and discover the teen's motivations. Melisandre in Game of Thrones. Melisandre was born an unknown number of years before the start of the series, possibly with the name Melanie. As a child slave, she was sold to the Red Temple and trained in the priesthood. Believing Stannis Baratheon to be the reincarnation of Azor Ahai, a mythic messiah prophesied by her fate, she travels to his island stronghold Dragonstone. During the events of A Game of Thrones, Tywin Lannister indirectly mentioned her as a shadowbinder from Asshai during a private conversation with Tyrion Lannister after the battle in the Whispering Wood. Also known as the Red Woman, Melisandre is described as an exotically beautiful and voluptuous foreign woman with red eyes and red hair, always dressing in red robes and wearing a red gold choker, set with a large shiny ruby. She rarely sleeps or eats, possesses magical abilities, and can cast glamour and manipulate fire and shadow, has prophetic visions by looking into fire, and takes an aggressively militant stance against the other religions of Westeros. Well, I hope you enjoyed this content. I hope you found it informative and entertaining. If you did, we will be producing a lot more like this and a lot more on tradition and folklore, etc. also. If that's the type of thing you'd like, maybe you'd like to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get up-to-date notifications of what new content we're bringing out. It helps the channel immensely and I hope you'll find it entertaining. But until then, Slán agus beannacht. Goodbye.